They said the house was safe. They said the girl was just imaginative. But the dog knew better. He'd been pacing near the hearth for days, whining low every time the fire went out. And then, one night, as the last ember died, he started to dig. What he uncovered didn't just shake the family, it exposed a secret buried for generations. The house on Hollow Bend Lane had stood for almost a century. Made of red brick and stacked stone, its walls held the memories of 3 generations. The floors creaked in familiar places, and the fireplace at the center of the living room had warmed more winters than anyone could count. When Julia's family moved in that spring, the house had already been empty for 6 months. The realtor called it quaint and full of charm, though the windows needed reglazing and the kitchen still smelled faintly of oil and ash. Julia was 7. She didn't care about peeling paint or loose floorboards. She liked the idea of having a staircase that wound upward, a dusty attic, and most of all, a fireplace she could sit near with her sketchbook. She was quiet, not shy. Observant. The kind of child who noticed when one shingle on the roof was darker than the others, or when the ivy on the side of the house curved differently near the basement window. The only one who truly understood her was Jasper, a 4-year-old retriever mix the family had rescued 2 years prior. Jasper never left her side. By the second week in the house, Julia started drawing the fireplace in her sketchbook. Not just once. Over and over. Each one slightly different. One time with soot forming a strange shape in the stone. Another with a crack near the bottom that looked like an eye. Her mother thought it was cute. "You're really into that fireplace, huh?" Julia just nodded. She didn't know how to explain it. Because every time she sat near it, even when it wasn't lit, she felt like something beneath it was breathing. Jasper noticed too. He would pace around the hearth when no one else was in the room. Sniff the corners. Whine low when the fire went out. One evening, after dinner, he sat down facing the stones and didn't move for nearly half an hour. Julia's father joked, "He thinks there's a squirrel in there." But Julia didn't laugh. Because that same night, she had a dream, or maybe it wasn't, that someone was whispering from beneath the hearth. Not words. Just sound. Like a hum layered with something else. Something sad. She told her mother. Her mother smiled tightly and said, "You're just adjusting, sweetheart." She told her father. He chuckled, "That old thing? I bet it creaks louder than it breathes." She told her older brother. He rolled his eyes and went back to his video game. Only Jasper listened. And that's when he started scratching. It began softly. A paw here, a paw there. Mostly at night. Mostly when no one was watching. But Julia knew. She could hear his nails tapping at the stone when the house went quiet. She sat beside him once, placed her hand on his back. His ears twitched, but he didn't stop. She whispered, "What do you hear?" He stopped briefly, looked up at her with eyes full of something heavy. Then went back to scratching. A week later, the first chunk of mortar flaked off. A small one, no bigger than a coin. Julia picked it up. It was darker than it should have been, not just soot dark, but almost scorched. Like it had seen something the rest of the stones hadn't. She placed it in her pocket and didn't tell anyone. Because no one believed her anyway. That night, the humming returned. But louder. Julia woke with her heart hammering and rushed downstairs. Jasper was already there, standing in front of the fireplace, tail stiff. He didn't bark. Didn't growl. He just looked at her. Then pawed the hearth again. Harder. This time, she didn't stop him. She brought her sketchbook and began drawing again. But now she didn't draw the fireplace whole. She drew what was beneath it. Long, winding shapes. Metal. And something else she didn't recognize, a box, maybe. Or a case. In the morning, she showed her mom. Her mom patted her head. "You're creative, sweetheart." Julia closed the book and said nothing. But that day, she watched Jasper sniff around the living room while her parents painted upstairs. He kept circling the fireplace. Then laid down, head on his paws, eyes never leaving the stone. Julia lay beside him, hand on his fur, and whispered, "I believe you." The next morning, Julia woke up before anyone else. The house was still, the air cool from the early spring chill that hadn't let go. She slipped downstairs in her socks, Jasper's collar softly jingling behind her as he followed without a sound. The fireplace looked the same. But it felt different. Julia crouched in front of it, her sketchbook hugged tight to her chest. She slowly opened to the drawing from the night before, the one with the shapes beneath the hearth. She couldn't explain how she'd drawn them. Not really. It was like her hand had just moved. Jasper sniffed the cornerstones again, this time with more urgency. His tail was down, and his nose hovered close to the floor. Then he pawed at a specific spot, not random like before. A single square stone near the back left, half hidden under the rug's edge. Tap. Scratch. Pause. Tap. Scratch. Julia knelt beside him and ran her fingers over the edge. It was colder than the rest. Rougher too. She leaned in closer and noticed a faint black mark on the mortar, almost like charcoal, smudged long ago. She pulled the rug back fully and exposed the entire base. That's when she saw it. A seam. A thin, perfect line that ran between two of the stones, forming a square. The edges were too clean. Too deliberate. It was a door. Not one with hinges, but something hidden. Set flush into the foundation. She called out. "Mom?" No answer. She waited. Then whispered, "It's okay." To herself? To Jasper? Maybe both. He sat beside her, alert. Together, they watched that scene for a long minute, neither speaking. Then Julia got up, ran to the garage, and came back with the smallest screwdriver from her dad's tool drawer. She jammed it gently into the seam. It didn't move. But Jasper started wagging his tail, just once, like he approved. At breakfast, Julia sat quietly. She had dirt under her fingernails and black dust smudged along her cheek. Her brother scoffed when he noticed. "You rolling in the fireplace now?" Their mom glanced at her, distracted. "Make sure you clean up before school, okay?" She nodded. But inside, she was buzzing. Because the fireplace was hiding something, and Jasper was trying to tell her exactly where to look. After school, she returned straight to the hearth. This time, she brought her flashlight. And Jasper. She moved slowly, careful not to make noise. Her parents were still upstairs, her mom on a work call, her dad sanding the bedroom window frames. She aimed the flashlight into the seam. Dust, soot, and something that glinted faintly. Metal? Jasper started to whine again, low and steady. Then, without warning, he began to dig. Fast. Desperate. Claws skimming over stone. Dirt and grit flicking into the air. Julia didn't stop him. She watched. And the moment his front paws hit something that clicked, something hollow, he froze. Ears up. Then he looked at her. She reached forward. Pressed her palm against the stone Jasper had uncovered. It was loose. Just barely. She grabbed her screwdriver again and wedged it beneath the edge. This time, it shifted. She pulled slowly, grit filling her nails, soot rubbing off onto her shirt. And then, it opened. Not wide. Just enough to reveal what looked like wood? No, a small compartment, blackened by smoke, with the edge of what seemed like a charred journal sticking out. She didn't touch it. Not yet. Her hands trembled. Instead, she whispered, "I told you." Jasper sat back on his haunches, panting softly. Satisfied. That night, she tried to tell her dad. "We found something under the fireplace." He barely looked up from his laptop. "Oh? Probably just old ash pockets. This place is ancient." She tried again. "There's a box. A real one. And something inside." He laughed lightly. "Well, let's not go digging too deep, huh? Might bring the whole thing down." She went silent. Because once again, no one believed her. But Jasper did. And now, she believed in what they'd found together. She returned to it the next morning. Waited until the house was quiet. Gently pulled open the compartment again. This time, she reached inside and pulled out the small blackened object. It was a book. Or what was left of one. The leather cover was cracked, the pages curled and brittle. The first two were blank. But the third? There was handwriting. Still legible. Still inked. And the date at the top, October 2nd, 1956. Julia didn't open the journal any further at first. She sat cross-legged in front of the fireplace with Jasper curled beside her, the book resting in her lap. Even touching the edges felt like handling something sacred, like a message from another life. The leather was dry, flakes crumbling with every shift. She handled it like an artifact. Her flashlight cast a dull glow across the pages. The ink on the third page was faded but readable. The handwriting leaned forward, old and practiced, like someone who had written by hand their whole life. It read, "They say the fire kept us warm, but it never felt like comfort. It felt like a warning. A wall between truth and the house that refused to forget." Julia blinked. She looked over at Jasper. He was awake, watching her, unmoving. Then she turned the page. The next entry was dated October 3rd, 1956. It continued. "She came back again last night. Not the woman, the sound. Same as always. Whispering from beneath. I asked James if he heard it. He said I was dreaming. But it wasn't a dream. The dog heard it too. He sat at the hearth all night." Julia's pulse picked up. A dog. Another one. Another person, 70 years ago, hearing the same thing she did. Feeling what she felt. And a dog who sat at the hearth like Jasper. She looked down at him again, her fingers tightening slightly on the book. "You were right," she whispered. She kept reading. Every entry was dated one day after the next. Short paragraphs. Small observations. Some more vivid than others. Some written in a hurried scrawl, others in neat, shaking lines. Whoever had written this, they weren't just recording thoughts. They were keeping a secret. Hiding it in plain sight. One entry stood out. October 5th, 1956, the box beneath the hearth isn't empty. I saw it after the third fire went out. Something glinted, something metal. I didn't touch it. I was afraid. James said if I pulled it out, the house would turn on us. But I think the house is already watching." Julia flipped the next page. It was smeared with ash. Literally. As if someone had burned part of it before closing the compartment. She blew gently across the surface, revealing parts of the next line. "Too late now. She knows we know. The girl is listening through the wall." The rest was unreadable. She turned the page again, and this one was torn. Not from time, but force. A jagged rip across the center, almost surgical. Whatever had been written was missing. Jasper's ears twitched. He sat up. There was no noise. No wind. But Julia could feel it too. The room felt tighter. Like the hearth knew she was reading the truth. For the rest of the afternoon, Julia didn't leave the room. She carefully photographed each legible page with her school tablet. Saved them in a folder labeled Fireplace book. She then wrapped the journal in a dish towel and placed it in the bottom drawer of her dresser, beneath her winter sweaters. Not out of fear. Out of respect. Because whoever had written those words, they didn't want them found easily. But they did want them remembered. That night, Julia didn't sleep well. Her dreams were filled with warmth, not comforting, but pressing. Heat radiating through the walls. Whispers again, but louder this time. A voice, almost close enough to make out. And in the dream, she was standing by the hearth again, watching Jasper did with urgency. Except this time, behind him, a shadow. Just a shape. Not her parents. Not her brother. Just stillness. Watching. She woke up sweaty. Jasper lay at the foot of her bed, tail tapping lightly. He was calm. But not asleep. Just waiting. As if he knew she'd need him to be there when she woke. The next day, Julia brought up the journal to her mom again. This time, she tried a different tactic. It's history, she said. It talks about someone who lived here before us. Her mom paused, visibly curious. Where'd you find it? Near the hearth. Her mother smiled, amused. Well, you always were good at finding things. But then the phone rang. Work again. The moment passed. The journal remained a secret. In the days that followed, Julia continued piecing together the entries. The name James appeared several times. As did someone referred to only as the girl. No names. No locations. But whoever wrote it seemed afraid of both, James and the girl. One entry hinted that the girl wasn't a stranger. She had once lived in the house. And whatever was beneath the hearth, it might have belonged to her. By now, the compartment was nearly fully cleared. Julia worked on it each evening after school, loosening more soot, brushing back debris with an old paintbrush. Jasper kept guard, watching the hallway. Every so often, he'd growl, not loudly, just enough to remind her they weren't alone. Not exactly. Finally, the metal appeared. It wasn't a box, as she first thought. It was a tin, rectangular, scorched, sealed shut with some kind of waxy residue. She held it up to the light. There was weight inside. And sound, a slight shifting, like glass or ceramic rubbing against metal. She turned to Jasper. You ready? He wagged once. And she smiled. Because she was ready too. Julia sat on the floor with the scorched tin between her knees. It was heavier than it looked, its edges flaked with what might have once been red paint. The seal along its lid was uneven, like it had been shut in a hurry, not with care, but with fear. She looked over at Jasper, who had taken up a guarding position by the front of the hearth. His head tilted, watching her. She whispered, I'm gonna open it. Her voice barely carried. Jasper didn't move. But he didn't look away either. She used her dad's smallest flathead screwdriver again, gently wedging it along the seam. The waxy substance cracked, tiny flakes falling like gray snow onto the rug. It gave with a soft pop. The lid lifted just a sliver. A faint, burnt smell escaped, not fresh, but preserved in time. A strange blend of ash, rust, and something older, like dried herbs or parchment. Julia lifted the lid the rest of the way. Inside were 3 items. A folded strip of yellowed cloth, possibly part of a dress sleeve, its hem stitched with tiny purple thread. A small porcelain figure, a girl in a bonnet, one arm broken off. A photograph, black and white, creased down the center. She didn't touch anything yet. Just stared. Her throat tightened. The girl in the photograph, maybe 8 years old, stood in front of the same fireplace. Same hearthstone. Same carved brick. She was holding the porcelain doll. Smiling. But there was something off. Her eyes. Even smiling, they didn't match her mouth. There was fear in them. Something hidden. Something that hadn't yet happened. Julia gently lifted the photo, turned it over. In fading pencil were 2 words, "For Evelyn." And a date, August 12, 1955. Almost exactly 70 years ago. She whispered the name aloud, Evelyn. And Jasper whined. Not loudly, but enough that it echoed in the silent room. The cloth, when unfolded, revealed a single button sewn into its corner. A lilac-colored pearl, elegant, delicate. Julia imagined it might have once belonged to a favorite dress. One that was never meant to be buried. The doll was cracked, one eye faded completely, the other still intact. It wasn't just a toy. It was a story frozen mid-sentence. Later that night, Julia pulled the old journal from its hiding place under her sweaters. She flipped quickly through the entries again, now looking for the name, Evelyn. And there it was. October 8, 1956. Evelyn's name came up again today. James warned me not to say it aloud in the house. But it's too late. She's already here. The doll moved last night. No one touched it. I watched. She's not angry. She just doesn't want to be forgotten. Julia dropped the book in her lap. She looked toward the hearth. It sat still and cold, but her skin prickled. It didn't feel like fear. It felt like recognition. The next morning, she waited until her mom was busy in the garden. She took the tin, the journal, and the photo into the basement, a place she'd always avoided. It smelled of damp wood and old paint. The floor was uneven, the shelves stacked with boxes they hadn't unpacked yet. She sat cross-legged on the floor with everything spread out in front of her. Jasper hesitated at the top of the stairs, then patted down carefully and sat beside her. Together, they studied the items again. That's when she made a decision. She was going to find out who Evelyn was. And why no one ever mentioned her. She started in the most basic place she could think of, the town library. The next day, after school, she walked in with a backpack full of secrets. The reference librarian, an older woman with silver braids and soft eyes, greeted her warmly. Julia asked, "Do you have old newspapers?" "Like, really old?" The woman nodded. "Microfilm archives." "What year?" Julia didn't hesitate. 1955 to 1957. The woman raised an eyebrow, curious but not probing. "History project?" Julia nodded. "Something like that." The library's microfilm reader was in the back corner, near the windows. Dusty, but working. Julia loaded up a reel marked Local Register, 1955. Hours passed as she spun through pages of old news. Car crashes. Birth announcements. Civic meetings. Then she saw it. Girl missing near Hollow Bend, parents say she vanished overnight. Dated August 14, 1955. Julia's breath caught. The article was short, but the details were unmistakable. Evelyn Harper. Age 8. Last seen playing in the living room. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. The house address. 145, Hollow Bend Lane. Her house. She copied the article onto notebook paper, hands shaking. Then she pulled out the photograph again. Same girl. Same fireplace. Same fear behind the smile. She whispered again, "Evelyn." And the lights in the library flickered, just once. Probably a coincidence. But Jasper, waiting outside by the library's front window, stood up suddenly. tail stiff. Watching. Julia stared at the printout of the newspaper article for a long time, her mind struggling to balance disbelief and certainty. The girl was real. Evelyn Harper had lived in the same house, stood before the same fireplace, and then vanished. And no one had told them. Not the realtor. Not the neighbors. Not even the local history book her school had used in class. A whole person had disappeared, and been forgotten. Or buried. Julia slipped the printout into her sketchbook and zipped her backpack shut. When she stepped outside, Jasper greeted her with a low whimper, then nudged her hand. She looked down. "I found her, Jasper." He wagged once. Just once. Back home, dinner was quiet. Her brother was loud as usual, talking about soccer tryouts and a kid who threw up during gym. Her parents exchanged glances and half-laughed through the evening. Julia didn't speak much. She kept glancing at the fireplace. Jasper did too. No one noticed. Later that night, she waited until the house was asleep. The wind was pushing through the trees outside. The floorboards creaked like they always did when it got colder. She tiptoed into the living room, flashlight in one hand, tin box in the other. She sat by the hearth again, opened the tin, and laid the photograph out in front of her. Then she took the cracked doll and placed it beside the picture. Jasper lay at her side. The silence was thick. Not scary, but full. Full of presence. Julia picked up the folded cloth. She ran her thumb across the button sewn into the corner. Her breath caught. It matched. Her mother's sewing kit, which had belonged to her grandmother, had a row of identical lilac pearl buttons. The kind you didn't find anymore. The kind that used to be sewn into Sunday dresses and passed down. She darted into the hall closet and returned with the kit. Opened it. Found the thread. Found the matching buttons. Same sheen. Same size. That cloth had come from someone in town. Someone close. She flipped the journal open again. Skimmed the familiar lines. Then her eyes caught something she hadn't noticed before. A half-erased note scribbled in the margin of an October entry. Wasn't her fault. Evelyn only went near the hearth because of the bells. The bells? Julia read it again. Because of the bells. She looked at Jasper. What bells? He tilted his head slightly. And then, deep in the house, something made a faint sound. Like a chime. Soft. Distant. Julia froze. She wasn't imagining it. It had come from the attic. The attic was the only part of the house she hadn't explored since moving in. It was always locked, the kind of lock built into the door itself, old and rusty. Her parents had said the key was missing and that it probably just had insulation and old boxes. But now, standing in the hallway at the top of the stairs with Jasper beside her, she heard it again. The sound. Chime. Once. Then silence. She pressed her ear against the attic door. Nothing. But Jasper growled, quiet, low, protective. Julia went back to her room and retrieved the screwdriver. She returned and pressed it into the edge of the lock. Old locks weren't strong. They were stubborn. This one gave way after a few minutes of careful prying and patience. It clicked. The door creaked open. Dust rushed out like it had been waiting years to breathe. The attic was small, no more than a crawl space with angled walls and exposed beams. A single window at the far end cast faint moonlight across the wood planks. And hanging from the ceiling, in the very center, were chimes. Wind chimes. Tiny, made of glass and metal, covered in soot. And just beneath them, on the floor, a small wooden box. Julia stepped forward, every part of her awake now. Jasper didn't enter. He waited at the threshold. She kneeled. Opened the box. Inside, nestled in a bed of dried flowers long since turned to dust, was a piece of paper. And on it, a note. If she hears the bells again, she will come back. Don't burn the hearth. That was it. No name. No signature. But Julia understood. Burning the fireplace had kept her away. But now that it was cold, now that they'd stopped lighting it, Evelyn could return. She whispered, "We're not afraid of you." And then she sat. Waited. Not for a ghost. But for a girl. A memory. A truth that had waited too long to be told. And in the quiet attic, with dust hanging like fog in the moonlight, she held the porcelain doll and laid it gently in the box. Later that night, Julia brought the attic box down into the living room. Placed it beside the hearth. Beside the tin. Beside the journal. Beside the photograph. She was building something. Not a shrine. A story. Something whole. Something honest. And when the morning sun broke through the curtains, her parents found her asleep on the floor, arms curled around Jasper, with the chimes softly swaying even though no wind stirred. It had been nearly a week since Julia found the tin beneath the fireplace, the photograph, the porcelain doll, and the attic box. Her room was now quietly transformed, a corner dedicated to Evelyn. Not in a way that felt scary or strange, but respectful. Like remembering someone you never knew, yet somehow always did. Her parents, still in their daily routines, noticed Julia had grown quieter. Not withdrawn. More focused. Her sketches, which used to be whimsical, were now methodical. She drew the fireplace over and over again, not just the outside anymore, but its seams, its hidden compartments, the symbol patterns in the soot. Jasper remained glued to her side. He no longer scratched at the hearth, but whenever she sat near it, he positioned himself between her and the room, as if guarding her from the rest of the world. She brought her mom into the living room one morning. "Can I show you something?" Her mom, mid-coffee sip, paused. "Of course." Julia led her to the fireplace. She pointed to the compartment. To the journal. The doll. The photograph. Her mom slowly knelt, brushing her fingers along the edge of the tin. Julia held her breath. "Please believe me." Her mom looked up. Where did you get these?" "Here," Julia said simply. "Under the fireplace." Jasper found it. Her mom picked up the photo, studied it. Eyes widening. "Oh my God," she whispered. This girl." Julia leaned in. "She lived here. Her name was Evelyn Harper. She went missing in 1955. Her mom's face went pale. "Why didn't the realtor mention this?" "I don't think anyone talks about it," Julia replied. "But it happened. And she left these." Her mom stood, paced a few feet, then returned and crouched again. She looks like you." Julia nodded. She had noticed that too. Same dark hair. Same soft, round face. Same kind of quiet in the eyes. That afternoon, her mom made calls. To the realtor. To the town clerk. To a neighbor who had lived in Hollow Bend since she was a child. Answers were hard to come by. Some didn't remember. Some pretended not to. And one, an older woman named Ruth, said something that stuck with Julia. She wasn't supposed to play near the fire. Her father said so. But she liked the sounds it made when it burned down low. Like it was whispering. That night, Julia returned to the attic. She lit a candle. Not out of superstition, but respect. She brought a small notepad and wrote, "Evelyn, I believe you. I believe you were here. I'm sorry no one listened. But I'm listening now." She placed the note beside the box, and the porcelain doll, and left quietly. When she got back to her room, Jasper was waiting, tail wagging once. The next morning, something had changed. When Julia came down for breakfast, her father, who rarely noticed much outside his own routines, was crouched in front of the hearth, staring into the stone. "Dad?" He turned. "This compartment you found, it's not in the original blueprints." Julia froze. "You looked?" He nodded. "I went down to the town office yesterday. Got copies. The fireplace is in the plans, but this whole lower section, it's not. Someone added it later." Julia sat beside him. Her father added, "You've done something amazing, kiddo. You uncovered part of this house that no one knew existed." And then he looked at her, seriously. "Do you think she's still here?" Julia thought carefully. "I think she's been waiting for someone to finish what she started." Her father nodded slowly. Then whispered, "Then let's finish it." That weekend, Julia and her dad began gently removing the lowest stones of the hearth, carefully, one at a time. Not tearing it apart, but respectfully uncovering what Evelyn had tried to show. Behind one of the stones, sealed inside a wall cavity, they found a bundle wrapped in aged linen. Inside were more items. A hand-drawn map of the house with symbols marked in the walls. A tiny silver ring sized for a child. And another photograph, this time, Evelyn with a woman. Likely her mother. Both standing near the back garden. But the photograph's edge had a faint burn mark. As if it had barely survived the fire. They brought everything upstairs, laid it out on the dining table. Julia's mom stared at the ring, visibly moved. "This looks like one my grandmother used to wear when she was little." Her voice trailed off. Julia's dad looked at the map. "These markings, they line up with air vents. Ducts. But some of them don't go anywhere." Julia traced one line on the map that led from the fireplace, all the way to the backyard. And ended in an X. She whispered, "She buried something." The family decided not to wait. They grabbed gloves, a trowel, and Jasper, and walked out back to where the X marked a spot near the old apple tree. Jasper led the way. Tail low. Focused. He walked directly to the spot on the map. And began to dig. The backyard was quiet except for the soft scraping of dirt under Jasper's paws. The sun had started to set, painting the sky in muted oranges and purples. Julia stood with the map in her hand, glancing between the X drawn beside the tree and the very real hole Jasper was now working through. Her dad stood a few feet back with a small shovel, ready to assist. Her mom had her arms crossed but stayed close, her gaze flitting between the dog and the apple tree, like she wasn't quite ready to believe what they might find. Jasper stopped suddenly. Then whined. Softly. Julia knelt beside him, brushing her hand over the disturbed soil. Her fingers hit something. Wood. Old. Cracked. Her dad dropped to his knees and helped clear the rest of the dirt. Within minutes, they had fully uncovered a wooden box. It was about the size of a shoebox, bound in rusted metal hinges, and completely sealed. No writing on top. No handle. Just a box. Julia whispered, "Do you think she put this here?" Her mom replied, "Only one way to find out." They carried the box inside, setting it carefully on the dining room table. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Julia slowly pried at the lid. It didn't give easily. Years of soil and moisture had swollen the wood. Her dad grabbed a putty knife and slid it into the seam. With a little effort, it cracked open. The smell was earthy, not foul, just ancient. Inside were layers of old linen, wrapped tightly around something. Julia slowly peeled them back. And uncovered a journal. Not like the one from the fireplace. This one was clean. Bound in deep green fabric. the initials EH embroidered on the corner. Evelyn Harper. She opened the first page. In neat cursive were the words, "For the one who finally listened." Julia's heart thudded. The date beneath, August 1st, 1955. The entries were longer than the ones in the Fireplace book. These weren't secretive. These were personal. Honest. The kind of entries written by someone who didn't just want to remember, but wanted to be remembered. Julia read aloud. "Mama says the fireplace is just a place to get warm. But I think it's a secret. Sometimes I hear things when the fire dies. Like it's whispering names. Mine, once." The entries spanned 2 weeks. They talked about her dog, a terrier named Percy, who slept by the hearth each night. About her father, James, and how he scolded her for being too curious. And about a woman Evelyn called only the Lady in Grey, who she sometimes saw out the window near the woods. Then came the final entry. "I'm hiding this because I don't think I'll get to say goodbye. Percy barked all night." The hearth made a sound like crying. "I'm not afraid. Just sad. If someone finds this, tell Mama I kept the doll safe. Tell her I remembered." Julia closed the journal. No one spoke for a long time. Jasper sat beside her. Then, suddenly, he stood up. Walked over to the fireplace. Stared. Then looked back. Julia followed. Kneeling by the hearth, she placed Evelyn's second journal beside the original. Both together now. And then she placed the porcelain doll gently between them. That night, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No creaking doors or flickering lights. Just a warmth that settled into the living room, a sense of peace. Julia sat with her parents by the fire, though it remained unlit. They didn't need the flames. Not anymore. Because Evelyn had been heard. In the following days, Julia took it upon herself to do something more. She typed Evelyn's story. Page by page. Using the journals, the photos, the articles, she created a document that would be printed and bound in soft covers. She called it, The Hearth That Remembered. The town library agreed to add it to their local history shelf. The librarian, the woman with the silver braids, smiled when she read the dedication. For Evelyn Harper, who waited patiently to be found. But even then, Julia knew it wasn't over. Because one afternoon, as she sat in the attic writing in her own notebook, she heard it again. The chimes. Once. Twice. No wind. No window open. Just a sound, clear and deliberate. She turned. There, on the attic beam, hung the same string of chimes. And beneath them, though she hadn't placed it there, was a single lilac pearl button. Jasper stood beside her, tail still. She bent down and whispered, "Thank you." 2 weeks had passed since Evelyn's final journal was found, and yet Julia couldn't let go of one nagging question. Why had Evelyn disappeared? She hadn't run away, the journals made that clear. And no one had taken her seriously in the weeks leading up to that August night. But there was still something unsaid, something not written down, not recorded in any archive. So Julia went back to where she always found answers, the town library. This time, she brought more than curiosity. She brought a plan. The local records room was tucked in the back of the library, past shelves of dusty novels and forgotten encyclopedias. The librarian with the silver braids gave Julia a knowing nod as she entered, as if expecting her. "I pulled some old tax rolls and property files for Hollow Bend," she said. "There's not much. But maybe enough." Julia smiled. "Thank you." The records were yellowed and brittle, typed with the rhythm of old typewriters. She started with 1955, the year Evelyn vanished. Hollow Bend Lane had 7 homes at the time. 3 were still standing. One had burned down in 1956, a house 2 lots over from Julia's. Julia underlined that entry. She flipped to the next page and found a name she hadn't seen before. Rutherford, M. Owner of a small house directly behind what was now her family's garden. No mention of a spouse or children. Just an address. And then another record, complaint filed, August 13, 1955. Julia's heart skipped. That was the day before Evelyn disappeared. The complaint had been handwritten and scanned into microfilm. She strained to read it. But the words were clear. Strange noise from neighbor's child again. Girl calls to things at night. Heard her whispering beneath the window after midnight. Dog won't stop barking. Fireplace lights itself when no one's near. Unnatural. Julia shivered. Fireplace lights itself. Her mind raced. This wasn't just a mystery. This was fear, fear that led to silence. The neighbors weren't trying to help Evelyn. They were trying to forget her. She kept digging. Found one final record in the following year's property logs. The Rutherford house had been condemned in early 1956, just 5 months after Evelyn disappeared. No reason given. Julia jotted down the old address and stuffed her notes in her backpack. Back at home, she grabbed her bike, told her parents she was going for a ride, and with Jasper trotting faithfully behind, she pedaled toward the other side of Hollow Bend. The lot was overgrown with weeds and wild grass. The foundation was still visible, concrete blocks in a loose rectangle, cracked and moss-covered. A few broken bricks jutted out at awkward angles. It had clearly been burned. The house was long gone. But as Julia stepped through the grass, Jasper froze. Then whimpered. She turned. At the center of the ruined foundation was a circular pit, no more than a few feet across. Blackened. Scarred. An old fire pit? Maybe. Or something more. Jasper paced toward it, then stopped and sat. Watching. Julia moved closer. Inside the pit, surrounded by crumbled brick and soil, was a piece of scorched metal. She leaned down and pulled it free. It was a sign. Charred but legible. Property of James Harper, EST 1948. Her breath caught. James Harper. Evelyn's father. He had built this? Or owned it? Then, why had she always thought the Harper family lived in her house? Julia sprinted home, heart pounding. She rifled through the maps from Evelyn's journal again. She had missed something. Something small, but now obvious. 2 maps. 2 different houses. One labeled the place we slept. The other, where they moved us. Evelyn hadn't always lived at Julia's house. They had moved just before her disappearance. Why? And what had they left behind? That night, Julia sat in her room with both journals and the maps spread out before her. Jasper was quiet, but alert. She studied the maps again, tracing every line. On the first one, the older home, she saw a faint drawing labeled cellar beneath the hearth. It was barely visible. Scribbled quickly. But it was there. She whispered to herself, there's another fireplace. And if that cellar still existed, maybe Evelyn's story wasn't done yet. She returned to the burn lot the next day, this time with her dad. She showed him the old foundation and the scorched pit, and when she held up the sign, he stared at it for a long time. Why would her father's name be on this? He asked. I think this was their first house, Julia said. Before they moved to ours. They spent the afternoon clearing away brush, revealing the full structure. And just behind the fire pit, under layers of soil and old brick, they found a square opening. Blocked by rusted hinges. A trapdoor. Jasper stood beside it. Tail still. Waiting. The trapdoor groaned under the weight of time and rust, but Julia's father managed to pry it open using a crowbar and steady hands. A breath of ancient, cold air rushed out, dry, metallic, and stale. It didn't smell like rot. It smelled like stone, like memory. They peered into the darkness together. A narrow set of stairs, carved directly from the earth, descended about 10 feet into the ground. "I'll go first," her dad offered. Julia shook her head. "I have to. She left this for someone like me." And so, flashlight in hand, she descended the stairs with Jasper following closely, his paws softly pressing the dirt. Her dad remained at the entrance, watching with quiet unease. The cellar was small, maybe the size of a bedroom. The ceiling hung low. Molded beams ran across the top, sagging in places. One corner had crumbled, likely during the fire, leaving a mound of debris. But the far side of the room was intact. And in it, another fireplace. Smaller. Narrower. Its bricks blackened, but untouched. Julia approached slowly. Jasper followed but paused 3 steps behind her. His nose twitched, ears perked. The hearth was cold. But beneath it, just like before, was a small cavity, a rectangular slot carved beneath the bottom brick. She knelt, reached inside, and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. It wasn't a journal this time. It was a bundle of letters, bound by twine. She sat against the back wall, flashlight beaming directly into the dusty air, and untied the bundle. The handwriting wasn't Evelyn's. It was messy, rushed, slightly uneven. It belonged to James Harper. The first letter began. "I tried to protect her. From them. From the house. But it was already watching. By the time I realized what it wanted, it had her voice. Her mother called it imagination. I called it a sickness. But Evelyn wasn't sick." Julia read each word with growing tension. Each letter unfolded more of the truth. Letter 2. She heard them in the fire. The names. The whispers. She said they told her things. Small things at first, like when it would rain. But then she said one told her that someone was coming. And that she had to go. Letter 3. I built this place with my own hands. Moved us here after the first whispers. Thought we could escape it. But she brought it with her. In the doll. In the chimes. And in the button her mother sewed on the morning she disappeared. Julia's hands trembled. The doll. The chimes. The button. They weren't just keepsakes. They were vessels. The final letter was short. I sealed the memory away. But I know now, it will wait. For the one who listens. For the girl who still hears the whispers. The last word was smudged. But legible. Julia. She gasped aloud. Dropped the letter. Jasper barked, not loudly, but with urgency. Her flashlight flickered once. Then steadied. She stared down at the name. It wasn't possible. Not unless. She scrambled through the letters, searching for dates. The last was written in December 1955. But the ink hadn't faded. The paper wasn't brittle like the others. And her name, it hadn't been a coincidence. It was a warning. Or a call. She whispered into the cold cellar, "You knew I'd come." And in response, the wind picked up above them, through the open trapdoor. Jasper whined, his body tense. Julia stood, bundled the letters carefully, and tucked them into her backpack. But before leaving, she looked once more at the hearth. This fireplace hadn't burned in 70 years. But its presence, its memory, lingered. Back above ground, her dad pulled her into a quick hug. "You okay?" She nodded. "It's not done yet. But we're close." That night, Julia returned to the hearth in her own home. She placed the letters beside the journals, the doll, and the chimes. It was no longer just a corner of relics. It was a history, living, breathing. A conversation between two girls across generations. She picked up her notebook and wrote one sentence on a new page. The fire never died. It just waited. And then she closed the book. Jasper exhaled beside her. Later, she showed the letters to her parents. Her mom read them in silence, lips trembling slightly as she traced the name at the bottom of the last letter. Her dad asked, "What do you think it means?" Julia replied without hesitation, that some stories want to be told. And some demand it. They didn't sleep well that night. Not out of fear, but out of anticipation. Because something had awakened. Something that remembered. The days that followed were quiet, but full of invisible motion. Julia knew the story was reaching its end, not because everything was explained, but because everything had been seen. Evelyn had waited 70 years for someone to listen, and now her voice had passed from a forgotten child into pages, photographs, whispers, and warmth. One evening, the librarian from town, the one with silver braids, called their house. She told Julia's mother that an old donation box from the library's basement had finally been sorted. A small box of unsorted letters had been found, undelivered mail, returned and never claimed, dating back decades. There was one envelope with no return address. Just 2 words on the front, "To her." Julia held it in her hands the next morning. It was aged, sealed with wax, and heavier than it should have been. She waited until she was alone, Jasper beside her, before she opened it. Inside was a folded note. The paper was brittle, but the handwriting matched the final letters she had found in the cellar. James Harper. If this finds her, tell her I'm sorry. I kept the truth too long. The fire took something, yes, but it also gave. It gave her a voice that lasted beyond my own. There was one more line, written shakier, perhaps in haste. She will return not to haunt, but to finish the whisper. Beneath the paper was a necklace. A silver locket. Inside, a photo, Evelyn as a baby. And her mother, the woman from the photo near the apple tree. Julia carried the locket to the attic. Hung it gently beside the chimes. Then she did something she hadn't done yet. She lit a single match. Held it near the fireplace, but didn't set anything ablaze. Instead, she whispered, "I hear you." The flame flickered sideways, even without wind. Then went out. Jasper sat beside her, eyes fixed not on the hearth, but just above it. Like he saw something she couldn't. Later that week, a letter arrived at their house addressed to Julia. No stamp, no envelope, just a folded page slipped through the mail slot. Inside was a short message typed on a typewriter. "We saw your entry at the library. We remember her too. There are others. If you're ready to hear their stories, we'll help you find them. Signed, the Hollow Bend Historical Society." Her hands shook slightly as she folded it. She wasn't done. Evelyn had been the first, not the only. That night, she pulled out her sketchbook. She drew the fireplace again, not cold and gray like in her first renderings, but warm, with a soft glow of light inside. In her drawing, Evelyn sat beside it. Not a ghost. Not lost. Just a girl, holding a doll, with her head tilted slightly as if listening. And smiling. Her parents watched from the hallway. They didn't interrupt. They'd come to understand something unspoken. Some memories don't just fade. They wait for the right person to give them shape. One morning, a few weeks later, Julia stood in the backyard beneath the old apple tree. Fall was coming early this year. Leaves had begun to curl yellow at the edges, and the grass was softer, colder. She placed a stone, one she'd painted by hand, into the soil. It read simply, Evelyn Harper, we heard you. Jasper sat beside it. The breeze stirred the wind chimes they had hung from a branch above. Once. Twice. Clear as a voice. Then silence again. In the weeks that followed, Julia found herself writing more. Not for school. Not for a project. Just because the stories kept finding her. Notes tucked in the old library books. A photo hidden behind wallpaper in her friend's house. A woman at the grocery store who whispered, "That dog of yours, he listens, doesn't he?" Everywhere she turned, the whispers were waiting. Not all scary. Just unfinished. Julia didn't tell everyone. But when someone needed to know, they just knew. And Jasper always led the way. One step ahead. One bark short of a sentence. On the final page of her new journal, Julia wrote. The fireplace didn't speak in words. It didn't haunt. It remembered. That's what this place is, not haunted. Remembered. Every house holds something. Not always tragic. But always waiting. She closed the book and set it beside the others in the carved nook by the hearth, where Jasper now liked to sleep. That evening, as the family sat quietly in the living room, her dad looked up from his book. Do you think Evelyn's really gone now? Julia looked toward the fireplace. No, she said. But she's not lost anymore. And somewhere in the walls, the air shifted again. Not cold. Just full.